Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you my winter reading recommendations. I think winter is probably one of the most atmospheric times to read, and I think it all has to do with like just being cozy in the house. It's just like darker out earlier, so you can just get cozy by the fire and read. So these are the books that I think would be really awesome to read during the winter time. Either they take place in a cold climate, or they just have like a dark spooky feel to them, or you can just lose yourself in that literary world. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out, I first have Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. This is my favorite Gillian Flynn novel, and so basically this one I feel like is the perfect book to read kind of around the winter time, because there is kind of a climatic event that takes place during the winter time, so it has all that kind of cold feel to it. But I don't want to spoil too much away, but the general premise is that it follows this girl who several years ago her family was murdered in cold blood, and she testified in court that it was her brother who was the murderer. But now after several years she's approached by someone who doesn't think her brother was the one who murdered her family. He thinks that her brother is innocent. So she kind of, as she's kind of going through this, she kind of revisits the past and looks at different memories to see if what she said in court was actually true, and it kind of goes off from there. But this one is very dark and spooky, and like I said, it does take place in kind of a cold climate, so or cold, like wintry season, so I feel like it perfectly encaptures that cold, silent winter night. Next up, I have a dark academia recommendation, and it is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I'm sure many of you probably already know about this book. This is basically a modern classic and pretty much inspired the dark academia genre that we kind of see today. So what I really love about this is not only is it just really interesting, you can see how this really kind of kickstarted dark academia, but from the beginning you know kind of what's going to happen, so you're trying to piece together the clues as to kind of why certain things are happening, which is really interesting. So it follows this guy who goes to this university, and he ends up getting involved in this very kind of elite classics group with a professor that only teaches those students. And from basically the first page, we know that one of the students is murdered, and so for the first half of the book it's like the build up to the murder, and then the second half of the book is the kind of aftermath of everything. And I just think this is a really interesting read, just because you do know early on what's going to happen, so you're trying to piece together the events of like why this happened, and also there's like unreliable narrators and all these things, so it definitely keeps you on your toes. And I think this one is just the perfect book to kind of lose yourself in during these kind of wintry months. So continuing on with the theme of kind of cold climate books, I next have Beartown by Fredrick Backman. This takes place in a small town in Sweden that doesn't really have a lot going for it, but when its like when its junior hockey team makes it to the semifinals, that is a really big deal in this kind of small isolated town in kind of the Swedish wilderness. But kind of a couple days before the big game, the star player ends up raping the general manager's daughter, and it very much divides the town. It goes into there, and so this book deals a lot with rape culture, victim blaming, all these things, and it has a lot of important topics for discussion. It's a very heartbreaking book, but the writing in here is so lyrical. I feel like you're just kind of like floating through this town, following all these different stories of the people that are there and how these events leave the town divided. I think that is just so interesting. So yeah, this book is very difficult to get through, but I think it's a very important read. And just having that small town in the wilderness and on a cold, wintry night, I think just has that atmosphere that would be perfect to read during the winter time. So next up, this is a book that took me by surprise, but again, it kind of has that wintry, cold night feel to it, and it is Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This, like I said, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, but this book is phenomenal. So it follows this girl who is a police officer and a detective, and there are these string of murders taking place that are made to look like overdoses, but they are in fact strangulation. So she's trying to figure out this kind of serial murder that is kind of going on. And then also there is her sister, who is a heroin addict who she hasn't seen in several months, and she's trying to find what happened to her sister, why she disappeared, all those things, and it kind of takes off from there. But this book honestly was so good. I think it deals with a lot of it raises a lot of important discussions about addiction and how it is a disease and some people can be genetically predisposed to that. Like, it raises a lot of important questions there, and abuse of police power, all those things. And this book, it packs a big punch, and the last like 50 pages were just super intense. So yeah, I feel like this one, again, it kind of takes place during the wintry months, so I feel like this is the perfect book to read around this time. But yeah, this one honestly, like I said, it took me by surprise, and it is really good. And lastly, I feel like historical fiction novels are really great to read during the wintertime, again, just because you can really zone in on the atmosphere. And so this is one that is part of a series, but you can kind of read it as a standalone, and it is Sunflower Sisters by Martha Hall Kelly. This is, like I said, the final book in the Lilac Girls trilogy, I guess you could say. But again, you can kind of read these books without having to read them in order. So this one you can kind of read as a standalone if you want, but it follows 3 different storylines during the course of the Civil War. So we follow Georgie, who's from a very affluent family, and she ends up becoming a nurse during the Civil War. We follow a slave in her experience, and then we also follow the slave owner's perspective. And so you kind of get all these 3 different storylines that eventually become intertwined. We know how the slave and slave owner narrative is connected, but you don't know how Georgie and her narrative gets intertwined. But yeah, this book honestly was amazing. This author is just phenomenal. I'll read anything that she puts out, so I'm very curious to see what she will write next. But yeah, this one is really interesting. It raises a lot of important discussions about slavery and racist ideas, and how they are very cyclic throughout our history, and how a lot of the same dialogue that is taking place here is kind of still very much prevalent today in American society. And yeah, I thought this book was phenomenal, and I feel like I said, I feel like this is a perfect historical fiction book to kind of lose yourself in, because I feel like I myself do this too. I tend to read just a lot of World War II historical fiction, never really venturing any like outside of that. But this one, I think because it takes place in the Civil War, is a little bit different, and yeah, you just completely lose yourself in this novel. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your winter reading recommendations are and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.